So last week, we talked, and I kind of got into it a bit, but I wanted to kind of open this up for a second for some conversation if you guys wanted to throw some things in. It was in 1 Corinthians 10, and I want to read that again real quick. And I've been on this same theme about trusting God instead of trusting in yourself, right? That's what we've been talking about. And the scripture last week, and I think I kind of got started on it, but I didn't really finish it. And this is what I wanted to talk about here. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10. A couple different things here. 1 Corinthians 10. Okay. Actually, 1 Corinthians 9 first. And that's where we started here, where I read the scripture in verse 24, where Paul says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. And everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They do it for a perishable wreath, but we do it for the imperishable. Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. But I buffet my body and make sure it's my slave, lest possibly after I preach to others, I myself may be disqualified." And then he goes into the children of Israel and all the things that happened, and then we ended up with the scripture here in verse 13 of chapter 10, where it says, "No temptation has overtaken you such that is common to man, but God is faithful, that will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide you a way of escape also, that you may be able to endure it. Therefore, my brethren, flee from idolatry." Now, so last week I got going on this, and this is what I want to talk about. When Paul says this word, flee from idolatry, when you read it in context, do you see where he's talking about self-trust. He's talking about the fact the Israelites were always trying to do things on their own instead of trusting God to get it done. And I said this last week, God always provides. He always provides a way of escape. He always provides something to get through whatever it is that the devil's throwing at you. He's always providing. But we're the ones that are always trying to look for it ourselves. So when we read the scripture last week where Paul says, right here in the beginning where I read it, he said, "Run in such a way that you may win." And then he says that in verse 26 that when I run, I don't run without aim, and when I fight, I don't fight in a way that I'm just throwing it in the air, but I buffet my body and make it my slave. The way that I see this when I read this here with what Paul's saying is, it's easy for us to put ourselves on a pedestal and think we really know the way to do things, instead of trusting God and finding out what God's way is. You guys understand what I'm saying? So when I read that scripture, does anybody else have something you might see here when you read this here in verse 27 of chapter 9, Corinthians, where he says, "I beat my body and make it my slave." Do you guys see anything else there? Anything else that kind of catches your attention? Anything else you want to talk about here? Because when I read this, I see this, that Paul is saying, look, I am not... It's not going to come on my own. It's going to come by me doing the things that I've learned from God. And I've got to make my body my slave that I do these things. 1 Corinthians, and it's interesting because all through this chapter, when he goes into all these different things, it's amazing because he's bringing out this idea of, flee from idolatry. It's idolatry, ultimately, that he's talking about is a self-worship. It's thinking that you can do things on your own instead of trusting in God to do it. That you can come up with your own realization. And... go back to verse 13, and let's read this here again in chapter 10, verse 13. "No temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it." How many of you guys ever heard this where people say, well, God doesn't give you more than you can handle? Have you heard that before?
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's usually from a situation to where they're going through something really hard, or somebody's dealing with something really bad, or whatever, and they think that, oh, well, everything's going to be all right because God just doesn't give you more than what you can handle. And when you read the scripture here, you see this where he says it here, that he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape. How many times have you heard people say, oh, well, God will provide you with the way of escape if you have too much? No, you don't hear that much. You hear that just God won't give you more than what you can handle. Have you guys ever heard people say that God is the one that gives you the temptation? I've heard actually people say this, that God is the one that's doing this to you to get you to, whatever. Believe Him or have more faith in Him or trust that He's faithful. I heard somebody actually say this last week, and that God put me in the middle of the storm so that I would trust that He's faithful. That He would be the one that would take care of me and get me out of the storm. I mean, does that make sense?
You know what's going around Facebook? If God brought you to it, He'll get you through it.
But
That's
you
what's
know,
going around Facebook.
but this is my question, and that's good, because look, if I was to sit here and say, okay, God has led me into a adulterous affair with this woman.
That's it. Yeah.
You know, God has
He's
led
gonna
me
get
to
you out of
this
it.
beautiful woman, and she's gorgeous, and led me into this adulterous affair, and I know God will get me through it. I mean, if I said that, what would you say? You know?
Yeah, well, it's also the same as like if we think of our own children. If we say, okay, we're going to put you out there by the snake pit, so then I'm coming back in, and so you guys supervise yourself. God, as a father and a loving father, isn't going to put us out by a snake pit.
That's right.
That's not His way. His way is love.
I disagree.
You disagree? Go ahead, bud. How do you disagree?
Go ahead.
Because I was praying this morning, and I asked the Lord not that I wouldn't make any bad choices today, and He said to me, "Do you want me to take your ability to choose away? Do you want to have no bad choices? You know, the opportunity to make a bad choice." But even God put the tree in the garden, so that they would choose. They had that ability, because love has to choose. Every time you have a choice of a bad thing or a good thing, there's an opportunity to show what you love. Do you love God, or do you love, whatever it is, lust or the devil or whatever, the evil, the bad choice, whatever the bad choice is, you have a choice.
Yeah.
So God He doesn't put them, it's just the way He made the universe where we get to choose. Even people think, well, I can't wait to die and go to heaven, so I won't have to worry about making bad choices and all that stuff anymore. The devil made a bad choice in heaven. There was the opportunity to choose in heaven, to choose to worship God, or to choose to, exalt yourself.
You technically don't disagree with me.
Oh.
You just said that.
Well, I think what happens is, I think that Christians get the idea that we're all on this big game board like chess, and God is saying, well, I'm moving my pawn.
I hope I'm not a pawn.
A pawn. Whereas
pawn.
He doesn't, we are free will creatures, we're free to make choices, but He doesn't put us in the, like in the Greek mythology gods, they would put one of their people in a place to show,
it's a contest.
A contest, and it's not.
Yeah, well, and this is where, James, you don't have to turn there, I can just read you the scripture real quick, but it's James 1:13. He says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God.
Right.
For God cannot be tempted by evil, and He Himself does not tempt anyone.
Right.
And it says, that you're tempted when you are carried away, enticed by your own lust. And the thing is, when people read that scripture, a lot of times they think, enticed by your lust, the word lust always is tied to something like sexual or immoral in that sense. But actually, the word lust, it just basically means wanting to do something, desiring to do something. And that doesn't have to be specifically something immoral. Most of the time it is. But whatever it may be. Like, the interesting thing is in this scripture that we're reading, that if you're not overtaken by a temptation that's uncommon. Like you were saying, temptations are there. When you live in this world, you're going to have temptations to make the wrong decision. So in that temptation, if you decide to not making a decision is still a decision. If you decide to, lying in a hospital bed, the doctor tells you you're going to die of cancer, if you decide to accept that, and think, well, God's just not going to give me more than I can bear. No, you made a decision to go with the doctor to die in cancer.
Right.
Whereas you could have said, no, God has given me a way of escape. What is that way of escape? He provided a way for me to be healed. So it's making that decision to decide, no, I'm not going to die of cancer.